The barn smelled of burnt rope and sour sweat. Gideon Hart stood at the threshold, one hand pressed against the splintered doorframe, the other gripping the leather reins of his mare. The night air behind him was cool, clean. The air inside this place was not. He shouldn't have come. But the letter had found him 3 days ago, slipped under his saddle while he slept in a boarding house outside Cheyenne. No signature. Just 7 words, scratched in charcoal. She's 9. Tomorrow they marry her. He'd burned it. Told himself it wasn't his concern. Rode 2 hours in the opposite direction before his hands started shaking so badly he had to pull off the trail and sit in the dirt until the sun went down. Now he was here. The barn was lit by a single lantern hanging from a crossbeam. Shadows stretched long and crooked across hay bales stacked against the walls. In the center of the space, a small figure sat on the ground, knees pulled to her chest, wrists bound with frayed twine. She didn't look up when Gideon stepped inside. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Don't what?" Gideon asked, his boots crunching over straw. "Don't look there." Her head was bowed. Dark hair hung in tangles across her face. She wore a dress that might have been white once, but now it was gray with dust and streaked with something darker near the hem. Her feet were bare, scratched, bleeding in places. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Who tied you up, girl?" She didn't answer. Behind her, leaning against a post, was a man. Older, thin as a rail, with a scraggly beard and a hat pulled low. He was whittling something with a knife, humming under his breath like this was Sunday morning, and he had nowhere else to be. "She don't talk much," the man said without looking up. "Bride's supposed to be quiet anyhow. That's what the preacher says." Gideon's hand moved to his belt, where his revolver sat heavy and cold. "You the one marrying her?" The man grinned, showing teeth the color of old tobacco. "Hell no! I'm just the keeper. Got paid $20 to watch her till morning. Man who bought her is getting the preacher now. Says they'll do it proper, with a Bible and everything." Gideon took another step forward. The girl flinched. "How old is she?" 9, maybe 10. "Don't matter much. It matters." The man finally looked up, eyes narrowing. "You a lawman?" "No." "Then it don't concern you." Gideon crouched down in front of the girl, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. She shrank back, pressing herself against the post. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ground. "What's your name?" he asked softly. Silence. "I'm not here to hurt you." "That's what they all say," she whispered. Gideon's chest tightened. He'd heard that line before. Different voice, different year, same hollow tone. He glanced at the man with the knife. "Who's the groom?" "Fella named Cyrus Talmadge, rancher up north. Lost his wife last winter. Figured he needed a new one." "And he picked a child." The man shrugged. "Law says a man can marry who he wants, long as there's a preacher and a signature. Ain't my business." "Law says a lot of things." Gideon stood. "Doesn't make it right." The man's grin faded. He set down his whittling and stood as well, knife still in hand. "You got a problem, stranger." "I do." "Then you can take it up with Talmadge when he gets here. Should be any minute now." Gideon turned back to the girl. Her shoulders were trembling. She was trying not to cry, biting her lip so hard a thin line of blood had appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Look at me," Gideon said gently. She didn't. "Please." Slowly, so slowly, she lifted her head, and Gideon's heart stopped. It wasn't her face that froze him. It was the scar. A thin, jagged line running from her left temple down to her jaw. He knew that scar. 8 years ago, he'd wrapped the wound himself. Her name came back to him like a lightning strike. Eliza Farrow, daughter of Samuel and Ruth Farrow, a couple who'd run a small homestead just outside Laramie. Gideon had worked for them one summer, mending fences and breaking horses. They'd been kind people, honest, the kind who said grace before meals and meant it. And then the soldiers came. It was 1866. The war had been over for a year, but grudges lasted longer than treaties. Samuel Farrow had fought for the Confederacy. That made him a traitor in the eyes of certain Union men who wore badges and carried torches. Gideon had been there the night they burned the Farrow homestead. He'd been 17, stupid, scared. He'd stood at the edge of the property with a dozen other ranch hands, watching the flames climb into the sky, listening to the screams. He hadn't lifted a finger. By the time the fire died, Samuel and Ruth were dead. Their son, too. The only survivor had been their daughter, a little girl, barely a year old, pulled from the rubble with a gash across her face. Someone had taken her. Gideon didn't know who. He'd told himself it wasn't his fault, that there was nothing he could have done. But that was a lie. And now, 8 years later, she was sitting in a barn with her wrists bound, waiting to be married off to a man 3 times her age. Gideon's voice came out rough. "Eliza," her eyes widened. "You know me!" "I knew your family." Her expression didn't change. "My family's dead." "I know." "Then you didn't know them well enough." The words hit like a fist to the gut. Before Gideon could respond, the barn door swung open. 2 men stepped inside. One was broad-shouldered, dressed in a clean black coat, with a Bible tucked under one arm. The other was tall, lean, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a gun belt. Cyrus Talmadge. He looked at Gideon with the kind of slow, measuring gaze a man gives to a stray dog. "You lost, friend." Gideon straightened. "No." "Then why are you in my barn?" "I'm here for the girl." Talmadge's expression didn't shift. He glanced at Eliza, then back at Gideon. "She's spoken for. She's 9 years old. And tomorrow she'll be my wife, legally. Got the preacher right here to make it official." The preacher, a soft-faced man with nervous eyes, nodded quickly. "All proper, sir. All proper." Gideon stepped between Talmadge and Eliza. "She's not marrying anybody." Talmadge's hand moved to his gun. "You looking to die tonight, stranger?" "Maybe, but not before I untie her." The barn went silent. Talmadge didn't draw. Not yet. But his fingers rested on the handle of his revolver, tapping lightly, like he was counting down the seconds before he'd need to use it. "You're making a mistake," Talmadge said calmly. "Wouldn't be my first. I paid good money for her." Gideon's stomach turned. "You can't buy a person. Law says otherwise. 4 years since the war ended, and plenty of folks still do business the old way. Quiet-like. Private auctions. No one asks questions. I'm asking." Talmadge's jaw tightened. "She was sold to me fair and square. Got the papers and everything. Legal transfer of custody from her previous guardian." "Who?" "Man named Dutch Carver. Ran an orphanage out in Bitter Creek. Said she was trouble. Wouldn't work. Wouldn't listen. Figured she'd be better off with a husband." Gideon's fists clenched. "So, you bought a child." "I bought a future wife. There's a difference. Not to me. Talmadge took a step forward. You got a name, stranger. Gideon Hart. Recognition flickered in Talmadge's eyes. Hart. I know that name. You used to work for the Pharaohs, didn't you? Back before they got burned out. Gideon said nothing. Talmadge's smile widened. That's right. I remember now. You were there that night, standing at the edge of the property with the rest of the cowards, watching the place burn. Eliza's head snapped up. He's lying, she whispered. Am I? Talmadge asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Ask him yourself, girl. Ask him where he was when your family died. Gideon's throat tightened. I was there. Eliza stared at him, her eyes wide, searching. But I didn't light the fire, Gideon continued, his voice low. And I didn't kill your parents. Did you stop it? She asked. Silence. Did you try? Gideon couldn't look at her. No. The word hung in the air like smoke. Eliza's expression didn't change. She just looked away, back down at the ground like she'd heard exactly what she expected to hear. Talmadge laughed. See? He's no hero. Just another guilty man trying to buy his way into heaven. Gideon turned to him, voice hard. Maybe, but I'm not letting you take her. You don't get a say. I do now. Talmadge's hand moved to his gun. You really want to die over this? If that's what it takes. The preacher stepped forward nervously. Gentlemen, please, there's no need for— Shut up! Talmadge snapped. The preacher fell silent. Gideon took a slow breath. I'll buy her from you. Talmadge raised an eyebrow. You got money. Enough. How much? $100. Talmadge laughed. I paid $300. Gideon's jaw tightened. That was everything he had. His entire savings from 2 years of ranch work. $300 then. Talmadge's smile faded. He studied Gideon for a long moment, then glanced at Eliza. Why? Talmadge asked. What's she to you? I knew her family. And I owe them. Talmadge's eyes narrowed. You think buying her back makes you a good man? No, but it's a start. Talmadge considered this. Then he spat into the dirt. Fine, $300, but I want it now. Gideon reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. He counted out the money slowly, each bill feeling heavier than the last. When he finished, he held it out. Talmadge took it, counted it again, then nodded. She's yours. He turned and walked out of the barn without another word. The preacher hurried after him, clutching his Bible like a shield. The keeper with the knife stood, stretched, and followed them out, whistling the same tune he'd been humming earlier. And then it was just Gideon and Eliza. Gideon crouched down and pulled a knife from his boot. Eliza flinched, but he moved slowly, cutting the twine around her wrists. The rope fell away, leaving red marks on her skin. You're free, Gideon said quietly. Eliza didn't move. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Why? She finally asked. Because it's the right thing to do. You think that makes it better? Gideon exhaled. No. Everybody says that after. Her voice was flat, empty. I know. She stood slowly, rubbing her wrists. What happens now? I take you somewhere safe. Where? I don't know yet. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. I don't need you. Maybe not. But you can't go back out there alone. I've been alone for 8 years. And look where it got you. She stopped. Her shoulders tensed. Gideon stood. I'm not saying I'm a good man, Eliza. I'm not. But I'm not going to let you disappear again. She didn't turn around. You didn't even know I was alive. I do now. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You were really there that night. Yes, and you did nothing. Yes. Why? Gideon's chest ached. Because I was scared, and because I was a coward. Eliza turned to face him. Her eyes were hard, cold. You're still a coward. The words cut deeper than any knife, but Gideon didn't argue. Because she was right. Outside, hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Riders coming fast. Gideon's hand moved to his gun. We need to go. Eliza didn't move. Who's coming? I don't know, but I'm not waiting to find out. He held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him, and for a moment, he thought she might take it, but she didn't. She just walked past him, out into the night. Gideon followed. The night was colder than it had been an hour ago. Gideon and Eliza moved through the darkness, staying off the main trail. The moon was a thin crescent, offering just enough light to see the uneven ground beneath their boots. Eliza walked ahead, silent, her arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't said a word since they left the barn. Gideon kept his hand on his revolver. The hoofbeats had faded, but that didn't mean they were safe. Talmadge had taken the money, but men like him didn't let things go, especially not when their pride was involved. After an hour of walking, they reached a narrow creek. Eliza crouched by the water and drank, cupping her hands. Gideon scanned the tree line, listening. We'll rest here for a minute, he said. Eliza didn't respond. Gideon sat on a flat rock and pulled out a piece of hardtack from his saddlebag. He offered it to her. She shook her head. You need to eat. I'm not hungry. You will be. She glared at him. Stop acting like you care. I do care. Why? Because you feel guilty. Gideon didn't answer. Eliza stood. I don't need your pity. It's not pity. Then what is it? Gideon met her gaze. I'm trying to do the right thing. Little late for that. Before he could respond, a voice called out from the darkness. Hart! Gideon was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. 3 riders emerged from the trees. Talmadge was in the center, flanked by 2 men Gideon didn't recognize. Both carried rifles. Talmadge's smile was gone. You lied to me, Talmadge said. How's that? You said you were taking her somewhere safe, but you're running. That tells me you know something I don't. Gideon's finger rested on the trigger. We're just passing through. No, you're not. Talmadge dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. See, I did some asking around after you left. Turns out you've got a reputation, Hart. Man who can't hold down a job. Drifter. Some say you were involved in a few things during the war that weren't exactly legal. That's old news. Maybe. But it makes me wonder what you really want with that girl. Gideon's jaw tightened. I already told you. You told me a story. Doesn't mean I believe it. One of the riflemen shifted, raising his weapon slightly. Gideon didn't flinch. Walk away, Talmadge. Can't do that. Why not? You got your money. Talmadge's expression darkened. Because that girl is mine. I paid for her, and I'm taking her back. Eliza stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. I'm not going anywhere with you. Talmadge glanced at her, amused. You don't get a choice, sweetheart. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. Gideon stepped between them. She's not yours anymore. Says who? Says me. Talmadge's hand moved to his gun. You willing to die over this, Hart? Already answered that question. Talmadge studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. Shame. I was hoping we could settle this peaceable. He drew. Gideon was faster. The shot cracked through the night, echoing across the creek. Talmadge's gun fell from his hand as he stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers. The two riflemen raised their weapons. Don't! Gideon warned, his revolver now aimed at the nearest one. They hesitated. Talmadge groaned, his face twisted in pain. You're a dead man, Hart. Maybe, but not tonight. Talmadge's eyes burned with fury. This isn't over! Yeah, it is. Gideon fired a shot into the ground near Talmadge's horse, sending it rearing. The two riflemen's horses spooked as well, and within seconds, all three riders were struggling to stay mounted. By the time they regained control, Gideon and Eliza were gone. They ran through the trees, branches clawing at their clothes. Eliza stumbled once, and Gideon caught her, pulling her forward. They didn't stop until they reached a dry ravine, hidden from view. Gideon leaned against the dirt wall, breathing hard. Eliza collapsed beside him, her chest heaving. Are they following us? She gasped. Gideon listened. The night was silent. Not yet. Eliza looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and something else, something he couldn't quite place. You shot him. Had to. He's going to come after you. Probably. Why did you do it? Gideon reloaded his revolver, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Because some things are worth standing for. Eliza stared at him. You think that makes you a hero? No. Then what? Gideon holstered his gun. Just a man trying not to be a coward twice. Eliza said nothing, but for the first time since they'd met, she didn't look away. So let me ask you, if you were Gideon and you knew your silence had cost lives years ago, would you have walked into that barn? Or would you have ridden the other way? Take a breath. Think about it. And if you're still with me, I need to know, what time is it where you are right now? Tell me in the comments. Because this story's about to take a turn you won't see coming. They stayed in the ravine until dawn. Gideon didn't sleep. He kept watch, his revolver resting on his knee, listening for the sound of hooves or voices, but the night remained quiet. Eliza slept curled against the dirt wall, her head resting on her arms. She looked smaller in sleep, younger, like the child she was supposed to be. When the first light of morning crept over the horizon, Gideon stood and stretched. His back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. Eliza stirred, blinking against the pale light. We need to move, Gideon said quietly. She nodded, wiping the dirt from her face. They climbed out of the ravine and headed east, toward a small town Gideon knew. It wasn't much, just a general store, a saloon, and a boarding house. But it was far enough from Talmadge's reach that they could rest properly. They walked in silence for the first hour. The landscape was flat and brown, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional Joshua tree. The sun climbed slowly, warming the air. Finally, Eliza spoke. You said you knew my family. Gideon nodded. What were they like? He hesitated. Your father was a good man, honest, worked hard. Your mother, she had a kind heart, always made sure everyone was fed, even when there wasn't much to go around. Eliza's expression didn't change. I don't remember them. You were young. I remember the fire. Gideon's chest tightened. I remember the screaming, she continued, her voice flat. And the heat. And the smell. But I don't remember their faces. I'm sorry. Why? You didn't kill them. No. But I didn't save them either. Eliza looked at him. You were 17. What were you supposed to do? Something. Anything. Would it have mattered? Gideon didn't have an answer. They walked in silence again. By midday they reached the town. It was called Redstone, though there was nothing red about it. Just dust and wood and the faint smell of manure. Gideon led Eliza to the boarding house, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. He paid the owner, a heavy-set woman with graying hair, for 2 rooms and a meal. They sat in the small dining area, eating stew and bread. Eliza ate slowly, like she wasn't sure if the food was real. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Gideon asked. I don't know. Weeks, maybe. Gideon's jaw tightened. What happened after the fire? Eliza set down her spoon. A woman took me in. Said she ran an orphanage. But it wasn't really an orphanage. It was a place where people bought kids. Dutch Carver. Yeah. He sold me to Talmadge 3 months ago. But Talmadge didn't want me right away. Said I needed to be trained first. So Dutch kept me locked up. Taught me how to be quiet, how to obey. Gideon's fists clenched. I'm sorry. Stop saying that. What do you want me to say? Eliza looked at him, her eyes hard. Nothing. I don't want you to say anything. They finished the meal in silence. That night, Gideon sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the stars. The air was cool, and the town was quiet. The door creaked behind him. Eliza stepped out, wrapped in a blanket the owner had given her. Can't sleep? Gideon asked. She shook her head. She sat beside him, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I used to look at the stars, she said quietly, when I was locked up. It was the only thing I could see through the window. Gideon said nothing. I used to imagine what it would be like to be free, she continued, to go anywhere I wanted, do anything I wanted. And now, she looked at him. Now I don't know what to do. Gideon exhaled. You can do whatever you want, Eliza. You're free now. Am I? Yes. She looked away. I don't feel free. Gideon didn't know what to say to that. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars. Finally, Eliza spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you really come for me? Gideon didn't answer right away. He stared at the horizon, where the darkness met the faint glow of distant fires. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, he finally said. Eliza looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her anger seemed to falter. Not gone, just cracked. Do you think they'd forgive you? She asked. My parents. Gideon's throat tightened. I don't know. Do you think I should? Gideon met her gaze. No. She blinked, surprised. You don't owe me forgiveness, Gideon continued. I don't deserve it. I didn't save your family. I didn't stop the fire. And I didn't come looking for you until it was almost too late. Then why did you come? Because I had to try. Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the stars. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. That's okay. But maybe I can try. Gideon's chest ached. They sat together on the porch until the sun rose. 3 days passed in Redstone. Gideon spent the time asking around, trying to figure out where Eliza could go. He visited the general store, the saloon, the church, but every answer was the same. No one wanted to take in a girl with no family and no money. On the 4th day, Gideon sat in the boarding house parlor, staring at the worn floorboards, when the door swung open. A man stepped inside. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd seen decades of hard work. He wore a simple shirt and vest, and his boots were caked with mud. "You Hart?" the man asked. Gideon stood. "Who's asking?" "Name's Ben Rourke. I run a ranch about 10 miles south of here. Heard you were looking for a place for a girl." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Where'd you hear that?" "The preacher. He mentioned it to my wife when she was in town yesterday." "And?" Rourke stepped forward. "My wife and I. We lost our daughter 5 years ago. Fever took her. We've been looking for someone to help around the place. Someone young who needs a home." Gideon studied him. "You want to take her in? If she's willing." "Why?" Rourke shrugged. "Because we've got room, and because every kid deserves a chance." Gideon didn't trust easily, but something about the way Rourke spoke, calm, steady, without pretense, made him pause. "I'll talk to her," Gideon said. He found Eliza upstairs, sitting by the window. She looked up when he entered. "There's a man downstairs," Gideon said. "Says he and his wife run a ranch. They're offering you a place to stay." Eliza's expression didn't change. "Why?" "Because they lost their daughter, and they want to help." "What do you think?" Gideon sat on the edge of the bed. "I think it's worth considering." "Do you trust him?" "I don't know him well enough to say. But he doesn't seem like the kind of man who'd hurt you." Eliza looked out the window. "What if he's lying?" "Then I'll come back and get you." She turned to him. "You'd do that?" "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll meet him." They went downstairs together. Rourke stood when they entered, his hat in his hands. "This is Eliza," Gideon said. Rourke smiled gently. "Hello, Eliza." She didn't say anything. "My wife and we'd like you to come stay with us," Rourke continued. "We've got a spare room and plenty of work if you're interested. But no pressure. You can leave anytime you want." Eliza studied him. "Why would you do that?" "Because we know what it's like to lose someone," Rourke said simply, "and because we believe everyone deserves a second chance." Eliza glanced at Gideon. He nodded. She looked back at Rourke. "Okay." Rourke's smile widened. "Good. We'll leave tomorrow morning, if that's all right." Eliza nodded. That night, Gideon and Eliza sat on the porch one last time. "Are you scared?" Gideon asked. "A little." "That's okay." She looked at him. "Will you come visit?" Gideon's throat tightened. "If you want me to." "I do," he nodded. "Then I will." They sat in silence, watching the stars. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. Gideon looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For coming back." His chest ached. "I should have come sooner." "You came. That's what matters." Gideon didn't know if he believed that, but he didn't argue. The next morning, Rourke arrived with a wagon. His wife, a kind-faced woman named Margaret, sat beside him. She smiled warmly when she saw Eliza. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Margaret asked. Eliza nodded. Gideon helped her into the wagon. She looked at him one last time. "I'll see you soon," he said. "Promise?" "Promise." The wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Gideon stood on the porch, watching until it disappeared over the horizon. Weeks passed. Gideon worked odd jobs around Redstone, saving money. He told himself he'd visit Eliza soon. But part of him was afraid. Afraid she'd changed her mind. Afraid she'd decided she didn't want to see him after all. One afternoon, he received a letter. It was from Margaret Rourke. Mr. Hart, Eliza's doing well. She's been helping around the ranch and settling in. She asks about you often. If you have time, we'd love to have you visit. Sincerely, Margaret Rourke. Gideon rode out the next day. When he arrived at the Rourke ranch, Eliza was in the yard feeding chickens. She looked up when she heard his horse, and a smile, small but real, crossed her face. "You came," she said. "I promised." She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Do you want to stay for dinner? If you'll have me, we will." That evening, Gideon sat at the Rourke table, sharing a meal with Ben, Margaret, and Eliza. The conversation was light, comfortable. For the first time in years, Gideon felt something close to peace. After dinner, he and Eliza walked outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. "Are you happy here?" Gideon asked. Eliza nodded. "I think so." "Good." She looked at him. "Do you think my parents would be proud of me?" Gideon's throat tightened. "I know they would." She smiled. A real smile this time. "Thank you, Gideon." "For what?" "For not giving up." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky turning dark, and for the first time in 8 years, Gideon didn't feel like a coward. He felt like a man who'd finally done something right. Years later, Eliza would still remember that sunset, the way the light stretched across the fields, the way Gideon stood beside her, quiet and steady. She would remember the promise he'd made and the way he'd kept it. And she would remember the day she decided that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward, together.